Well, good evening, Jeremy. It's great to be back together here discussing another debate. I know tonight is particularly special for you. For those watching, if you don't know, Jeremy came to Edelman from Senator Harris's campaign.
Yeah, and it's one of those really things for us in the campaign. Debate night was always a big night, right? It was going to be a big night for fundraising, but it was also one of the first chances for the American people to get to know your candidate so we could try and win the general primary. I will say tonight was a little extra special, of course, because this would have been the first time most Americans actually met Kamala Harris and want to be able to compare and contrast her policies to the vice president's. So, yeah, it was a pretty big moment, pretty exciting, I think, all the way around. And I think we had a lot different of a debate than we did last week.
Absolutely. I think we can both agree that tonight both candidates came out looking like winners. The Republicans are going to argue that Pence came out as the clear winner, and the Democrats are going to argue that Senator Harris did. However, I think if you look at both of them, they both managed to stick to their talking points, craft the narrative that they wanted, despite what the question was asked, and they were able to really drive the message home tonight to the voters they were speaking to. Both definitely spoke to the moderate voter, leaning in on issues that they think will persuade that unknown base.
Yeah, for sure. I think Kamala Harris's job tonight and what she wanted to achieve was to go in there and say, look, I'm vice president to Joe Biden. I am not this liberal monster that the Republicans say that I am, but also show that, like, as the future of the Democratic Party, she's a formidable candidate, a historic candidate, and someone who you could see leading the party in the future. I agree with you. There were a lot of times where Kamala Harris pretty much stuck to her talking points during the night. I will say the person who was most close to his talking points would have been Mike Pence. I completely agree with you. He seemed to know what his strong suits was, wherein each time that he spoke, he went back to them. Pence wanted to spend time talking about the economy. He wanted to force Kamala Harris to talk about judges and court packing. He wanted to go after Kamala Harris for her prosecutorial record. And I think as a debater, that was a very effective tactic.
He also did an excellent job tonight at staying on message and portraying a different character than the president. After last week's debate, where there was a large feeling of disappointment coming out of that first presidential debate, I think tonight both candidates were able to restore some faith in the American political system, especially when it comes to Vice President Pence. He is someone who is able to express empathy. He talks directly to the people. He is likable, and he is a champion of the president's agenda. So if you are a moderate swing voter who may like the president's policies but has a really hard time liking the individual, Pence is someone you want to hear from. He's the guy that you want sitting across the table because he's likable and relatable. Speaking of those swing voters, tonight during the debate, Frank Luntz ran a focus group with those voters. They noticed that Senator Harris came across as condescending. As someone who worked on her campaign, do you think that that was intentional? And how do you think that's interpreted? Historically, she has been pretty authentic and genuine, and it seems that this focus group found her to be off of that norm and more in line with someone who's condescending through her expressions.
When I first started on the Kamala Harris campaign back in 2019, one of the first things that I sat down and did was look back at a lot of the research on women in politics. And, Kamala Harris has a tough job being a woman of color and also being one of the first women and women of color in a lot of the positions that she's held. I know Edelman's research of Time's Up would have told you that, a quarter of media coverage during a time period during the campaign, had some sort of racist or some sort of, sexist tropes within it. And because of that, Kamala Harris is almost fighting on several norms. On one hand, she's trying to, prove to the American public that she and Joe Biden would be a better alternative to the status quo. But she's also got to shoulder that burden of trying to avoid being the trope of the angry Black woman. During the campaign, when we created social media content for Senator Harris, one of the things we try to do is portray that authentic character or that Mamala character that you hear them talk about a lot. of the woman who cares about her family, she cares about the issues, and she's running for president to help make the world a better place. And as vice president, I think they're trying to portray that tonight as well. It's interesting, the focus group, saw her as condescending, for example, because there have also been several articles tonight, notably younger publications, that have said that her facial expressions and her remarks were pure mood, fighting against, mansplaining, right? So I think a lot of it is in the eye of the beholder, but I think with a lot of women in politics, this is one issue that is just hard to escape from. Elizabeth Warren, had to battle this. Amy Klobuchar had to battle this, and Kamala Harris is seeing the same thing as she runs for president too. I will say, I do think that Kamala Harris, though, as a lawyer, as a prosecutor tonight, did an excellent job of trying to find out what her strong points were and trying to nail us home with the vice president, notably the COVID-19 response. I thought she was very effective when she, stuck to those points and stuck to those facts, and really kind of forced Mike Pence to back up a little bit and think about the COVID response and how effective that was for the American people. Not an easy job to do, but I was pleased with that. And then when speaking to people on our campaign, they were pleased with that response too.
That's a Democrat talking point. That's where the Democrats have wanted to take this conversation. We discussed this a few weeks ago when it came to the Supreme Court nominee and the desire for the Democrats to pull the conversation back to the response to COVID-19 and not allow the Republicans to force a narrative ahead around pro-life, judges, the Supreme Court, the future of that, but to get us talking back about COVID-19, which we did see at the beginning of the debate tonight. I will say that I think the vice president did an excellent job of sticking to the facts and calling out moments where the senator had contradicted what she herself had said previously, or the candidate himself, Joe Biden.
Yeah, and that's a very effective tactic that Republicans are using. Most Americans aren't going to recognize the difference between the primary and the general election, where when running for president, Senator Harris might have had one position, but now that she's on Team Joe Biden, she's really adopted his policies and proposals and is trying to do what most vice presidents do and be that loyal deputy. I think, she has done an excellent job of sticking to the talking points that are outlined on joebiden.com when it comes to fracking, for example, economy, police reform, for example, and really highlighting those tactics. I think one of the biggest tests we're going to see in the next few weeks is if the vice president can do the same thing and stick to his talking points as well, because it's a very effective Republican talking point at the end of the day. I do think there were some misses for Kamala tonight, though. More notably, she wasn't able to answer the court packing question, and Republicans are going to play that on loop forever because a lot of moderate Republican voters are generally worried about packing the court. But at the same time, I think she effectively was able to articulate, one, she's not a radical leftist that's being controlled by Bernie Sanders and AOC. But number two, the future of the Democratic Party looks pretty bright. I also think, there was a moment at the end of the debate and toward the front where I think both candidates really were able to shine and give us a little bit of relief from what we might have seen the other week with the presidential debate between Vice President Biden and President Trump. And that's when they took a question from a student who was in the area. And Mike Pence and Kamala Harris both talked about, one of the reasons why, they thought America had a bright future ahead of them. It kind of reminded me of one reason why I got into politics, where we talk about trying to help our neighbor and trying to help, our society become better. And I thought that was a much needed light moment, especially since the last 2 weeks have been so chaotic. And of course, I also really appreciated, as a person of color who recognizes this historic moment of Senator Kamala Harris being on the vice presidential ticket, where Mike Pence took the time to recognize that as well. It came across as genuine, authentic, and it was a much needed moment in what has been just a stressful election season.
We can agree that most people who get involved in politics are there to empower change. While we may not always agree on what that change should be, both parties are working to make a difference in the lives of American people. And both sides are going to argue that they disagree with the other. But anyone who's willing to get up and run for office, run to lead our country, definitely is there to empower change for the American people, the change that they see necessary. And that'll be something that, while we will never agree on what those topics likely are, it is a driving factor that most candidates have when making a decision to run for office or to be a staffer for an elected official. Tonight, as we look back at the vice presidential debate, are there any moments that we can talk about that would help benefit our clients? One that comes to mind for me is the fact that both candidates drove the narrative they wanted. They were asked a question, and we saw numerous times where the Senator Harris and Vice President Mike Pence both evaded the question, went straight to what they wanted to talk about, pulled the narrative back to where they wanted to be. And I think oftentimes when we're talking to our clients, they are very keen to answer the question that's asked, to immediately go to exactly what they're being asked versus taking a step back and thinking, what is the narrative and what is the message that I want to tell, and how do I push forward with that?
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. I mean, I know you mentioned one of these when we had this conversation that the media has such a low trust rating today because the public just doesn't trust the media saying. I think following these candidates' examples when it comes to trying to refocus the narrative is an excellent idea. I also think one thing we can also learn from tonight is just the ability to get your point across in a calm and collected way, as opposed to what we saw 2 weeks ago. I think the way the message is delivered matters tremendously, and who is delivering it matters tremendously. I know we give Mike Pence a lot of credit for being a loyal deputy to the president, but I think he also is able to calm a lot of moderate voters' minds at the end of the day who might, be unsure about voting for the president, but might see a delivery that is calm and collected and reasonable and say, you know what, I can still support the president. I think the same goes for Kamala Harris. There's a lot of concerns with Joe Biden's age on the ticket. Having her deliver some of these messages with confidence and saying, look, the future of the party is here. It's strong, it's powerful, it knows what the future looks like. I think our clients can learn from that. I think delivery matters, how it's delivered matters. And I think, as you said, is absolutely correct. Making sure you get the points across that you want to get across when there's little trust in the media also matters too.
Well, it's fair to say that next week, all eyes will be on the president and former Vice President Biden as they take the stage for hopefully the second debate. We saw a pretty rocky first debate tonight, definitely helped restore some of the confidence in American voters. We'll see what comes out of next week.
I am hoping that the moderator has a mute button next week, so maybe we can learn a little bit about both candidates. But Lindsay, I'm excited for next week. I will see you then. Have a good night.